He told me she was just a friend, but every Friday, his heart packed a bag before I did. So the morning I found her lipstick in our kitchen, I didn't cry. I booked a flight to London. If this story resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because, tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. The mansion was silent, the kind of silence that comes not from peace but from absence. The kind that hums through glass walls and marble floors when laughter has long since stopped visiting. Lila Bennett moved through it quietly, her bare feet whispering against the cold stone. The morning light hit the kitchen's chrome edges, reflecting her face in distorted fragments, a metaphor she didn't need explained. She poured herself coffee, though she knew she wouldn't drink it. Ethan's untouched mug from last night sat beside hers, a single ring of residue marking where warmth used to be. Every Friday was the same. He'd call around noon, voice brisk, smooth, "I've got a late meeting, love. Don't wait up." And every Saturday morning, she'd wake to his absence, pretending she believed the lie. But last night, she didn't need to pretend. The lipstick was her answer. A rich scarlet shade she never wore, smeared faintly against the rim of his favorite glass. Right there on the marble counter, glowing like proof beneath the pendant lights. Lila had stared at it for a long time, feeling the quiet throb behind her ribs. Not rage. Not even jealousy. Just the dull, hollow ache of realization, she was a placeholder in a story he hadn't finished reading. Outside, the world adored Ethan Cole, the visionary billionaire, the charming philanthropist, the man who built empires and broke stock market records before 35. Inside, he was a ghost, present in form, gone in every way that mattered. Lila used to paint. Before the gala invitations, the luxury cars, the staff who called her Mrs. Cole with polished smiles. Before she learned that even palaces could be prisons. She hadn't touched a brush in 3 years. Her old art studio, tucked behind the rose garden, had become storage, forgotten canvases collecting dust beside boxes labeled Ethan's archive. She sometimes wondered if that's what she'd become too, an archived memory. That afternoon, she scrolled through social media, the modern window into betrayal. Vanessa Hale, Ethan's ex, had posted a photo. It was subtle, of course. Just 2 wine glasses, half-drunk, and the unmistakable reflection of Ethan's cufflink in the glass. The caption read, "Weekends are for remembering." Lila stared at it until her vision blurred. Her fingers hovered over the screen, tempted to respond, to post something, anything, but what could she say that wouldn't sound like begging for attention? Instead, she closed the app, exhaled slowly, and whispered to the empty room, "I remember, too." That night, she set 2 dinner plates out of habit. Ethan didn't come home. The clock ticked past midnight. At 2 a.m., Lila stood by the window, city lights flickering below like scattered stars. Her reflection looked back at her, elegant, calm, heartbreak hidden behind mascara and poise. A life built for display. She whispered to the glass, "This isn't love. It's performance." Then, with a steadiness that surprised her, she walked to the study and opened her laptop. The screen's glow painted her face as she typed flights from New York to London, one way. Her heart pounded as if daring her to stop. But she didn't. She selected the earliest flight, 7:15 a.m. Her finger hovered over the confirm button. Then she pressed it. Upstairs, she moved through the walk-in closet, shelves lined with designer dresses, shoes that had never touched sidewalks, bags that still smelled like new leather. Each piece a symbol of how Ethan loved to provide instead of feel. She took only 2 suitcases. One for essentials. One for memories. Her wedding ring lay on the vanity table. For years, it had felt like armor. Now, it looked like a shackle. She slipped it off, watched it roll twice before stopping beside her perfume bottle, her final act of quiet rebellion. By dawn, she stood in the foyer, the sound of her rolling suitcase echoing off marble floors. She turned once, looking around the mansion that had once felt like a dream. The chandeliers still shimmered, the orchids still bloomed, everything perfect, sterile, lifeless. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Goodbye, Mrs. Cole." And then she stepped outside, into the morning rain, her breath visible in the chill. Each drop that touched her skin felt like baptism. Each step toward the waiting car felt like resurrection. At the airport, her hands trembled slightly as she handed her passport to the agent. "Business or pleasure?" the woman asked, smiling mechanically. Lila hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Neither." "Freedom." The agent chuckled, not realizing how literal it was. As the plane took off, Lila pressed her forehead against the window, watching the clouds swallow the city she'd once called home. Her reflection in the glass looked softer, freer, though her eyes were red. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like running away. She felt like running toward something, herself. Have you ever realized someone you loved was choosing someone else, not with words, but with silence? Would you have stayed, or packed your bags, too? Tell me in the comments below. Airplane Broken Heart. The plane landed in London beneath a sky the color of pewter, moody, uncertain, but alive. As the wheels screeched against the runway, Lila's chest tightened, not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in years, possibility. She stepped out of Heathrow into the cold wind that carried the faint scent of rain and espresso. For the first time in her adult life, no driver waited with her name on a placard. No assistants, no itinerary. Just her. A taxi driver shouted over the noise of traffic, "Where to, love?" Lila hesitated, realizing she had nowhere particular to go, a terrifying kind of freedom. Then she smiled, a little nervously. "Somewhere with character," she said. "Not too perfect." He grinned. "I've got just the place." The cab rattled through the narrow streets of Notting Hill, pastel houses lined like faded dreams, the air damp with history. The driver dropped her at a small bed and breakfast with ivy climbing its brick facade and a crooked wooden sign that read The Sparrow's Nest. The owner, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes, greeted her warmly. "You look like you've been carrying more than luggage," she said softly. Lila's throat tightened. "You could say that." The woman handed her a key. "Then rest, dear. This city has a way of showing people who they really are, if they let it." Her room was simple, one bed, one window, one chance to start over. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every distant look Ethan had given her over the years. She realized she didn't miss him. She missed the version of herself who had once believed him. Outside, the city hummed. Somewhere, music drifted from a nearby pub, laughter, life, the sound of people who had stories worth telling. Lila sat up, her pulse quickening. Maybe she wasn't meant to just hide here. Maybe she was meant to begin again. She opened her suitcase, pulling out a small sketchbook she hadn't touched in years. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the blank pages. And then, without overthinking, she began to draw. Her first stroke was shaky. Her second, steadier. By the 10th, her heart was racing. The pencil moved like it remembered her. Back in New York, Ethan Cole stood in the doorway of their home, silence stretching around him like punishment. Lila's side of the closet was empty. Her ring sat on the vanity. He stared at it, the glint of gold mocking his reflection. He called her phone. No answer. Called again. Still nothing. Then he saw the flight confirmation email in the shared inbox. London. One way. He laughed once, short, disbelieving. "Of course you'd leave without saying goodbye," he muttered. But the laugh broke halfway, turning into something raw. For the next week, Ethan buried himself in meetings, fundraisers, anything that drowned out the silence. But every night, when the house went still, her absence filled the walls like an echo he couldn't escape. Vanessa called once. "You don't look well," she teased. "I'm fine," he said. But even she noticed it, the shift in his eyes. He wasn't chasing her anymore. He was haunted. "Ethan," she said quietly, "what did you do to her?" He didn't answer. Meanwhile, in London, Lila was transforming. She spent mornings sketching in Hyde Park, afternoons exploring art galleries, and evenings drinking tea with strangers who never asked about her past. At a local cafe, she met Owen Hart, a photographer who spilled coffee on her sketchbook and apologized with such sincerity she couldn't help but laugh. "You've just added character to my art," she said, dabbing the stain. He smiled, boyish and unguarded. "Then I guess I'm part of the masterpiece." That line would have made her cringe a month ago. But now, it only made her blush. They began to talk, about creativity, about fear, about freedom. Owen was everything Ethan wasn't, attentive, genuine, unpolished. And when he looked at her, it wasn't through her, it was at her. One evening, he asked, "Why London?" Lila hesitated. "Because I needed to stop being someone's second choice." Owen's eyes softened. "You deserve to be someone's only." The words hit her harder than she expected. That night, back at the B&B, she sat by the window sketching again, but this time, she drew herself. Not as Ethan's wife. Not as a billionaire's shadow. Just Lila Bennett, a woman standing in the rain, suitcase in hand, light breaking behind her. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Ethan made a decision. He boarded his jet to London. Not out of control, but out of conscience. Vanessa had confronted him earlier that day. "She loved you," she said bitterly. "And you treated her like an afterthought." For the first time, Ethan couldn't argue. As the engines roared, he stared out the window, whispering into the clouds, "I just want her to be okay." He didn't know what he would say when he found her, only that he had to try. Back in London, Lila stood outside an art gallery where she'd just been invited to showcase her sketches in a local exhibit. The curator had said, "Your work feels like rebirth." And that was exactly what it was. She smiled up at the marquee, heart swelling with something close to pride. She was building a life again, piece by piece, stroke by stroke. What she didn't know was that Ethan's car had just turned onto the same street. Their worlds, once bound by marriage, broken by betrayal, were about to collide again. Have you ever walked away from someone, not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving yourself? Would you ever take them back if they came looking for you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Red Heart Airplane. The day of Lila's art exhibition arrived with the kind of grey London drizzle that made the city glimmer, every cobblestone slick, every light haloed in mist. Inside the small gallery on Portobello Road, warmth replaced the chill. The air hummed with low conversation, soft jazz, and the faint scent of coffee and rain-soaked wool coats. Lila stood before her display, 12 sketches that traced her emotional rebirth. From the woman in the window, a hollow-eyed portrait of her former self, to Becoming Sky, where light spilled through broken shapes, every piece told the truth she had once hidden behind a perfect smile. People stopped, lingered, asked questions. A journalist murmured, "There's so much pain in these lines, but so much freedom." Lila smiled faintly. "They're the same thing sometimes." Owen appeared beside her, holding 2 glasses of wine. "To freedom, then," he said, offering one. "To honesty," she replied. They clinked glasses gently, the sound delicate, almost sacred. When she looked up at him, she saw no agenda, no calculation, just warmth. It terrified her a little. He noticed her hesitation. "You don't have to prove anything tonight," he said softly. "Just be proud of what you made." She exhaled. "I think I am." Outside, a black car pulled up to the curb. Ethan Cole stepped out, rain spotting his dark coat, the city's chill biting at his jaw. He hadn't slept. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion, his hair damp. But there was something else there too, humility. He stood at the entrance, staring at the gallery's window display. Her art. Her name. He whispered it under his breath. Lila Bennett. Not Mrs. Cole. Just Lila. Inside, Lila felt it, a ripple in the air. The same inexplicable shiver she used to feel when Ethan walked into a room. She turned slightly, her breath catching as her gaze landed on the doorway. He was there. For a heartbeat, time didn't move. Her glass trembled slightly in her hand. Owen noticed her expression shift. You okay? Lila's lips parted, her voice barely a whisper. He came. Ethan moved closer, each step heavy, unsure. When he reached her, his voice cracked the quiet like a whisper against glass. Lila. It had been months since she'd heard her name in his voice. It still carried power, the kind that hurt and healed all at once. Why are you here? She asked, steadying her tone. To see you. She laughed softly, but it wasn't humor. You had that chance every day for 5 years. Owen stepped slightly closer, protective. Is there a problem? Ethan's eyes flicked toward him, reading the unspoken connection instantly. No problem, he said tightly. I just needed a word with my wife. Lila's jaw tightened. Ex-wife. The word landed sharp as glass. The crowd's hum continued around them, oblivious. But between the three of them, silence thickened. They stepped outside into the rain. The street lamps painted gold circles in the puddles. Ethan exhaled, his breath fogging. I came because I had to say I'm sorry. Lila folded her arms, rain streaking her hair. You don't get to say that now. I do, he said quietly. Because it's the only truth I have left. She turned away, but his voice followed her. I was cruel. I was selfish. I thought money could buy peace, but it only built walls. And when you started fading behind them, I thought silence was easier than honesty. Lila's throat ached. She'd imagined this moment 100 times, rehearsed her anger, her calm, her indifference. But now, none of it fit. Why now, Ethan? Why come all this way? He looked at her with eyes stripped of arrogance. Because when I saw your ring on the vanity, I realized you'd finally done what I never had the courage to, you let go. She blinked back tears. I had to, she whispered. You made me invisible. I know. His voice broke. And I can't fix what I broke. But I can stand here and tell you I see you now. The rain fell harder, dripping from his lashes. She studied him, really studied him. The man who once made her feel like the center of the universe now looked like a man orbiting regret. Seeing me now doesn't undo years of not looking, she said softly. I know, he said again. But I'd rather face the truth too late than never face it at all. Owen watched from the gallery window, uncertain whether to step in. But he saw it, the way her body trembled, torn between closure and the old ache of familiarity. Ethan noticed her hesitation and took a careful step closer. Lila, I didn't come to ask for another chance. I came to tell you, you were always the best thing I ever had, and the worst thing I ever lost. Her chest tightened painfully. For years, she'd waited for that confession. Now that she had it, it didn't heal her, it freed her. She looked him in the eyes. I don't hate you, Ethan. But I can't go back to being the woman who did. He nodded slowly, tears barely visible in the rain. I don't deserve that woman anyway. When she turned to walk back inside, Ethan caught her wrist gently, not to hold her back, but to linger on the last connection they'd ever share. Are you happy? He asked. She met his gaze, her eyes steady, her voice calm. I'm becoming. Then she slipped her hand from his, leaving him standing beneath the rain, a man learning, finally, how to be alone. Back inside, Owen met her with quiet concern. "You okay?" She smiled faintly, wiping at her damp cheeks. "Better than okay." He offered her a towel, half laughing. "You look like you just survived a movie scene." She exhaled, a laugh escaping her lips, real this time. "Maybe I did." That night, long after the gallery had emptied, Lila sat in her room at the Sparrow's Nest, sketching again. She drew a single image, two figures standing in the rain, one walking away, the other rooted in place. At the bottom, she wrote a single word, closure. And for the first time, she felt it. London woke to the soft rhythm of rain again, as if the sky hadn't yet finished crying for all the things left unsaid the night before. Lila woke early, unable to shake the heaviness of Ethan's face in the rain, not because she wanted him back, but because she finally saw him clearly. She sat by the window of her small room at the Sparrow's Nest, sketching the skyline as the city stretched awake. But her lines were distracted, hesitant. Every stroke looked like indecision. By mid-morning, she received an envelope slid beneath her door. Her name written in Ethan's familiar, deliberate handwriting. Inside was a single note. "Meet me at the Thames, by the bridge where we took our wedding photos. One last conversation, no expectations. Please." For a moment, her instinct was to ignore it. Closure had already come, hadn't it? But something in his tone, the quiet humility, felt different. Not manipulation. Not control. Just a man trying to make peace with the damage he caused. She folded the note and slipped it into her coat pocket. When she arrived at the bridge, the sky was overcast, the wind cool. Ethan stood there, hands in his pockets, watching the river move with the slow patience of someone who finally understood time. He looked smaller somehow, not in stature, but in certainty. When he turned and saw her, his breath caught. "You came." "I wasn't sure I should," she admitted. "I wasn't sure I'd deserve it if you did." She crossed her arms, staying a few feet away. "What is this, Ethan?" He took a deep breath. An apology that took too long. For a while, neither of them spoke. The wind filled the silence, carrying the faint sound of a street musician playing violin nearby, a haunting, beautiful tune that made everything feel cinematic and fragile. Ethan finally said, "When you left, I realized I'd built everything in my life except the one thing that mattered, peace." Lila's voice softened. "You had peace, Ethan. You just didn't know how to live in it." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I used to think love was control. That if I could keep things perfect, they'd stay. But you were never something to be controlled. You were the only thing real." Her throat tightened. "Then why did you treat me like a burden?" He stepped closer, careful not to break her space. "Because I was scared. Of being enough. Of being loved for who I was, not what I built." The confession cracked something in her. For years, she'd blamed herself for not being exciting enough, patient enough, beautiful enough. But hearing this, hearing that his failures had never been about her, felt like untying a knot inside her soul. "I'm not asking for another chance," he continued. "I just need to tell you something before I go back." Lila's heart pounded. "Go back?" "I'm selling everything," he said simply. "The house, the business. I'm donating most of it. I don't want to keep building monuments to my ego. I want to build something that matters." Her eyes widened. "Why tell me this?" He smiled sadly. "Because once upon a time, you believed I could be better. And I need you to know, you were right." Lila swallowed hard, fighting tears. "Ethan." He shook his head gently. "Don't. You owe me nothing. If there's someone who makes you laugh again, don't let the ghost of me haunt that. Promise me that." She looked away, blinking fast. "There is someone," she said quietly. Ethan nodded once, a flicker of pain in his eyes, but also peace. "Good. Then I can let go knowing you're finally being seen." They stood in silence for a long while, watching the river. When the wind blew, it carried away the weight of everything they'd never said. Finally, Lila reached out, touching his sleeve. "For what it's worth," she said, her voice trembling, "you were loved. Truly." He smiled through his tears. "And I didn't deserve it. But thank you." As she walked away, her coat fluttering in the wind, Ethan stayed by the railing, watching her figure disappear into the crowd. He whispered, "Goodbye, my love," knowing it wasn't an ending, it was mercy. Later that evening, Lila found herself in Owen's photography studio, a sunlit loft smelling of coffee, dust, and freshly developed film. He turned when she entered, instantly reading her expression. "You saw him?" She nodded. "For the last time. Do you regret it?" "No," she said, surprising herself. "It didn't hurt like I thought it would. It felt like closing a book I'd already finished." Owen smiled softly. "Then maybe now you can start writing a new one." Lila looked around the studio, walls lined with portraits of strangers, each face holding a story. She realized she wanted to tell stories again too, not just her own. "I want to paint again," she said suddenly. "Not to escape, but to feel." Owen grinned. "Then let's find you a canvas." That night, under the golden glow of the studio lights, Lila painted for hours. Every stroke was liberation, messy, imperfect, alive. Owen watched quietly, camera in hand, capturing her not as a muse, but as a woman reclaiming her life. When she finally stepped back, covered in paint and sweat, she looked at what she'd made, a wild, abstract swirl of colors that somehow felt like both chaos and peace. She turned to Owen and smiled. "It's not perfect." He shook his head. "Neither are the best stories." Spring came early that year, soft sunlight threading through London's clouds, melting the winter grey into quiet gold. For months, the city had felt like a cocoon, and Lila, for the first time in her life, had allowed herself to transform inside it. She rented a small art studio above a bookstore near Covent Garden. The walls were old, paint-chipped, and uneven, but it smelled like turpentine and possibility. Every morning, she opened the windows, letting in the city's pulse, the chatter of markets, the distant echo of street performers, the hum of living. On the far wall hung her newest piece, Becoming. It was her most personal work, a self-portrait, half shadow, half light, her gaze steady and unashamed. It was the centerpiece of her upcoming exhibit, Fragments of Freedom. The title had come to her one evening as she watched raindrops trace patterns on her window, realizing that healing wasn't one grand moment, it was 1,000 small choices to keep living. Owen entered the studio carrying 2 cups of coffee. His smile was easy now, his presence familiar, not consuming, not demanding, just there. He set a cup beside her and leaned against the window frame. "You're getting famous," he teased. "There's a waiting list for your opening night." Lila chuckled softly. "Let's not call it fame. Let's call it, finally being seen." He studied her. "You look happy." She tilted her head, considering. "I think I am. Not because everything's perfect. But because I stopped needing it to be." He nodded approvingly. "That's when you know you've made it out." Across the ocean, Ethan Cole stood on the balcony of a much smaller apartment, his first home in years without staff, without extravagance, without distraction. He'd sold his company, as he'd promised, donating most of the proceeds to fund art programs for women rebuilding their lives. It was Lila's influence in motion, her voice, her compassion, her strength, echoing even in his absence. He'd sent one final message weeks ago. No begging. No grand gesture. Just a single line. Thank you for teaching me what love isn't. And, in doing so, what it could be. He never heard back. He didn't need to. Some silences mean peace. On the night of the Fragments of Freedom exhibit, the gallery was overflowing, journalists, artists, and strangers drawn by whispers of a woman whose art felt like resurrection. Lila stood before her collection in a deep green dress, her hair loose, her heart steady. As people moved through the room, pausing before her paintings, she realized something profound: she didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to Ethan. Not to the world. Not even to herself. Owen approached with a quiet smile. "You ready?" She took a slow breath. "I think I've been ready my whole life. I just didn't know it." The curator introduced her with a few words, an artist whose pain became her paintbrush, whose story became her strength. When she stepped up to speak, the crowd fell silent. Her voice wavered at first, then steadied. "I used to think freedom meant leaving," she began. "Now I know it means staying, in your truth, in your worth, in the person you become after everything breaks." She glanced toward one of her pieces, The Woman in the Rain, two figures parting at a bridge. "I don't paint to forget," she continued. "I paint to remember that even endings can be beautiful." Applause rose softly, like a tide of understanding. Afterward, as the crowd thinned, Owen slipped his hand into hers. It wasn't dramatic, it was natural, quiet, earned. He looked at her and said, "You know, I never believed in fate." She smiled. "Neither did I." "So what's this, then?" She thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe not fate. Maybe just the right chapter, finally." He laughed softly, and for the first time in a very long time, Lila laughed too, the sound full and unguarded, echoing through the gallery like sunlight. The next morning, Lila returned to her studio early, before the city woke. She picked up her brush, staring at the blank canvas waiting for her. Outside, church bells tolled faintly in the distance. And for a moment, she thought about Ethan, not with bitterness, not with longing, but with a strange tenderness. He had been a storm. But even storms leave behind cleaner skies. She whispered to the quiet room, "Thank you for teaching me how to love again, starting with myself." Then she dipped her brush in color and began to paint. Months later, one of her pieces hung in a charity exhibit in New York, Closure, the sketch of two figures in the rain. A man in the crowd paused before it, recognizing the lines, the posture. Ethan smiled faintly, running a thumb along the frame. He didn't need to read the title. He already knew. Then he turned and walked out into the afternoon sun, his reflection merging with the light, finally at peace with who he had been, and who he could still become. Back in London, Lila and Owen walked through Hyde Park, spring blossoms fluttering in the breeze. She stopped near the pond, watching children sail paper boats across the water. He leaned close. "What are you thinking about?" She smiled softly. "That life is funny. Sometimes you lose everything, and that's how you find what matters." Owen brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "And what matters most?" She looked at him, eyes warm. "Love. Not the kind that cages you, the kind that lets you fly." He kissed her forehead gently. "Then let's keep flying." They stood there for a while, two souls who had learned that real love doesn't demand perfection, only courage. As the camera fades in the final shot, the park glowing gold, her laughter carried on the wind, Lila's voice narrates softly. "I thought my story ended when I left him. But it turns out, it was just beginning. Sometimes, losing everything is how you find yourself, and sometimes, yourself is exactly who you were meant to love all along." Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.